Welcome. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. My name is Andrew Romanoff. I'm a candidate for the United States Senate, used to be the Speaker of the House in Colorado and the President of Mental Health Colorado. I know there's some folks who are joining us at Romanoff 2020 on Facebook and Twitter, so we're just pausing long enough to let them join us. You can always follow these town halls. We hold them every Friday at noon Mountain Time and every Tuesday at 5 p.m. if you go to andrewromanoff.com/live. andrewromanoff.com/live. I feel a little bit like a talk show host. My first guest today is a friend and a candidate for the United States Congress, a retired Marine Corps officer and special operator, a father, and a friend. Please welcome, there's no applause in our studio audience. I'm sorry about that, Ike. But please welcome the next congressman from Colorado's 4th Congressional District, Mr. Ike McCorkle.
Hi, Andrew, and everybody else who's out there watching. I just want to extend my gratitude to each and every one of you, and especially to you, Andrew. And I just wanted to let you know how proud it makes me personally, to have your trust and confidence. And the reason it means a whole lot to me is because I got a whole lot of combat Marines and hard chargers out there that are willing to vouch for me. But what means a lot to me is when I get, my neighbors to vouch for me, and my fellow environmentalists and legislators that have served in the House and actually gotten things done that is in keeping with the best interest of the people that we are supposed to be in office serving. And so I want to extend my thanks and my gratitude for having me on the show and giving me the opportunity to speak and be heard by my fellow progressives and environmentalists and folks from every party, because I think one of the biggest problems in this nation right now is a breakdown, the partisan gridlock in Washington, where we're just getting nothing done anymore. And if we start working together and adhering to policy that's in keeping with people's best interests, I think that, together, folks like you and I are going to be able to get some good policy passed that'll address the environmental crisis and income inequality and immigration and geopolitics. And so you have my thanks and my gratitude, and I'll turn it over to you for, questions or the continuation of the hosting of the show.
Thanks a lot. I didn't sign up to be a Zoom host, but I think we're all improvising in the course of this pandemic, and I hope you and your family are safe and healthy too. I want to echo what you said and offer my support to your campaign. It'd be an honor and a joy to serve with you in the United States Congress here. I know somebody told me the worst part about running for office right now would be winning, because then you have to go to Washington, to a pretty dysfunctional institution, especially the Senate. But I think the citizens of the 4th Congressional District would be lucky to have you representing them. Can you tell us, for folks who might not be familiar with Colorado's 4th District, what counties, what part of the state we're talking about here?
Yeah, sure. So it's a broad section of the state. It's the 22 eastern counties. Basically, the 25 over, it kind of skirts around Pueblo, and it skirts around Fort Carson. But largely the 22 counties east of the 25, all the way from up in Weld and Phillips and Sedgwick and Washington County and Yuma and that section up there, all the way down, to the south eastern corner, Baca County, in the Comanche grasslands down there. And then, of course, you have Los Animas County and Trinidad, all the way right back up here to Douglas County, where I live at in Parker, the Castle Rock area.
If folks want to learn more about the district or about you, I want to make sure to put in a plug. What's your website?
Yeah, it's ikeforco.com. So IKE, the number 4, co.com. And, I've been Ike since I was a kid. My granddad gave me that nickname. My actual name is Isaac, but I go by Ike. And I like to think that it's something like Eisenhower, because really, if you look at policy, today's progressive is yesterday's Eisenhower Republican.
Yeah.
And so when I talk to folks, I like to remind them that we're really all Americans, not Democrats, independents, or Republicans, and that we just need to start serving with integrity and voting for folks based on, their character and how their policy is going to benefit the constituents in our districts, instead of based on affiliations.
Yeah, I hear you. I have a friend who was running out for San Miguel County Commissioner, a guy named Paul Reich. So, of course, he had a button that said, I like Reich. I assume you've got one that says, I like Ike, to harken back to the original Eisenhower campaign.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, we have the I like Ike buttons, and we even did a little jingle on, Ike for Colorado. So I like it.
Right on.
And I like Ike too, because he brought, folks together around shared values and policy that was nonpartisan, regardless of party. So there are a lot of things about Eisenhower I like. Also, he gave us a great warning about the dangers of the intrusion of unwarranted or undue influence on our legislators, fiscal influence, and he talked about the congressional military industrial complex and its ability to corrupt legislators' motivation to serve the people before they serve shareholders or corporations. And he was talking about, our own fossil fuel industries and arms corporations' abilities to corrupt our legislators' motivations.
Right.
And nowadays, with Citizens United, it's expanded and it's international and it's conglomerate corporations, but we really need to take that corruptive fiscal influence out of our legislature.
We should talk about that, because that's one of the many priorities that you and I share. I guess it's fair to say if you could trade Donald Trump for President Eisenhower, pretty much any president that you could think of recently, you would do that in a heartbeat. Hey, just by way of introduction, just if you had to describe yourself in a phrase or a sentence, just so people have an understanding. I know there's a longer biography on your website, but what should people know about you?
I like to describe myself as a post-partisan progressive that's fighting for the people before corporate interests or any interests for that matter. If I had to describe myself, I'd say a post-partisan, progressive environmentalist, father, and former Marine officer that is dedicated to integrity and the rule of law. And I think those are the foundations of our government: integrity, the truth, and the rule of law. Because without it, you can't have an accountable system. Our entire government was, of course, as you know, built as a system of checks and balances, equally powerful branches of government that were supposed to, provide accountability to to their equally powerful branches. And that system's really broken down. And so if I had to describe myself in a sentence, I'd say I'm a progressive, a post-partisan progressive environmentalist and concerned father and citizen.
Right with you. Well, I'm not a dad, but I take your point. And I was joking on a town hall last night. I used to teach American government, and I would ask my students to name the 3 branches of government. I feel like I should go back and regrade the papers for the ones who couldn't, because we don't really have 3 functioning independent branches of government, thanks in large part to the invertebrate caucus of the U.S. Senate that Mitch McConnell leads now, surrendering to Donald Trump. Let me, I want to ask you, we have a lot of ground to cover and not a great deal of time. So I want to say thank you for your sacrifice. And it's not enough to thank a veteran if we don't assure that you all get the support you need. And I know in your district and in the state of Colorado, there are a lot of veterans who aren't getting what they need. I ran a mental health organization, as you know, for the last 4 years. We've seen suicide rates among the veteran population dwarf those among the civilian population. It's heartbreaking and painful to me to say to somebody, as we do in effect, go fight for our country, risk your life, die if you have to. And if you make it out and come home, we're going to toss you to the curb. We're not going to give you the mental health care, the job training, the housing, the assistance that you need to rejoin civilian life. So can you tell me a little bit about your experience, either personally as a vet or the other women and men who have served in uniform that you're hoping to represent in the 4th District?
Yeah, I'll say a few things. From my own perspective, I want to start off saying a few things just about the perception that you're talking about. And there was a perception, of course, back through the Vietnam era of troops coming back and being, not treated well. And then through the, OIF and OEF, the Afghanistan and Iraq conflicts, and as troops came home, they received a much different reception. However, at the same time, their health care was not being invested in adequately. There were, attempts to privatize veteran health care. And then at the same time, some of the folks that we served with, some of the folks that even, gave their last, final measure of sacrifice for this nation that I served with, over in Iraq, some of those folks weren't citizens. And like my friend Jesus Suarez del Solar, who passed away in Iraq, he wasn't a citizen. Now, some folks like him, service members that weren't citizens, that went over, that weren't killed in action and did come back, are now, facing the prospect of deportation. And not just facing the prospect of it, but there are a lot of families and veterans that have been deported. And our current Congressman, Ken Buck, is doing nothing to address that issue of, combat United States service members, veterans and their families being deported from this country. So I think that there are ways that we were treated much better coming back, but there are also ways that veterans continue to come back and not get the care that they need, not get the mental health, treatment that they need. And
I'll pause you on just one point and make this agreement with you. You win, I win. You sponsor in the House, I'll sponsor in the Senate a bill that makes sure if you serve our country, you're a citizen. You become a citizen. I mean, we need comprehensive immigration reform that doesn't take decades on end. But it's unconscionable to me to say to somebody, we're willing to put you in harm's way so that we can survive, and then we're going to deport you when you come home. And it's not just the citizens, as he said, it's the residents of Colorado and America deserve representation in that sense.
Yeah, and I think I threw in my platform a federal service for citizenship guarantee. So, yeah, absolutely, I would agree that anyone that is willing to, sacrifice their life for the nation and raise their right hand for that matter and swear to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Anyone that's willing to go do that should be granted citizenship. I mean, that's just common, decency.
I couldn't agree with you more. I know we jumped into this conversation and we're getting a few questions. I should have set the stage a little bit. You're going to be the Democratic candidate against Ken Buck in the fall because you have managed, unlike me, to clear the entire field of Democratic candidates. I've still got one candidate standing in my way on the Democratic side, but I want to say congratulations. I had a conversation a couple weeks back with Jillian Freeland, your counterpart in the 5th Congressional District based in Colorado Springs, who is also, I guess, the nominee presumptive, or I don't know what title we should assign to you.
Yeah, I mean, we were fortunate enough, and I think it is partially also because, our platform and policies, it really speaks to the needs of the people in our district. But we were fortunate enough to, do some hard work and get in touch with all the delegates. And we took the primary with 83% of the vote. So, like you said, that means we're in the general campaign against Ken Buck, and we've got this couple extra months to fill our coffers to really organize that 22 county GOTV campaign and get out there, target those persuadable independent voters who are critical to winning our district, because CD4 is winnable this time around. The numbers are there. There's 200,000 independents in the district. A third of them are marked as persuadable. Almost 40,000 Dems didn't show up in 2018. Just those two groups together can put us on the cusp of winning.
You're talking about the non-voting Dems and the persuadable and affiliated voters.
Right. Yeah, it can put us right on the cusp of getting those 72,000 votes that we need to get to our win number of 192.
I want to talk a little bit, we can talk a little bit about the politics of this, but I didn't mean to cut you off earlier in discussing the mental health needs and frankly the healthcare needs of vets, because it's come up in a lot of our conversations on these town halls that even before the pandemic hit, people were not getting the care they needed. And now that we're in a pandemic, obviously the consequences are even more serious. I haven't seen the suicide numbers. I have seen an uptick in calls to crisis lines, a 9-fold increase by one account, people experiencing anxiety, depression. If you are a veteran, in some ways, the stress that you go through isn't really a disorder at all. I remember meeting with a Medal of Honor winner named Ty Carter who said we ought to take the word disorder out of PTSD because it's a natural response to the kind of trauma that you go through. And I know you were wounded in combat as well. So what can and should and must we do, in your view, to make sure that when it comes to healthcare generally or mental health care specifically, that we get vets the support they need so they don't end up taking their own lives or doing themselves harm?
Yeah, I hate to go back to everything being tied to money, but it's all tied to money. And so I think really investment is the answer, and investment in the VA's healthcare system and in a robust system that vets can have access to. And, you know, if a veteran leaves the service, they should be able to, you know, pick up a phone and get in touch with someone, a mental health professional or a crisis line, which there is a veterans crisis line, but they ought to be able to access it from, you know, the time that they serve until, you know, the time that they, you know, pass away, because there's gaps for service members that leave the service, not like myself retiring, but separate from service after 4 or 8 years and maybe have done a combat tour or two, but then don't necessarily make that threshold to receive the continuing mental health care. So I think we need to look at providing service members with mental health care for the duration. And honestly, when it comes to that, I think that, you know, we as human beings are susceptible to mental health, you know, challenges. All of us are, because we're human.
Sure.
And so I think, you know, everybody needs access to mental health care and preventative care from birth to death. And
I totally agree with you there. I mean, we ought to be integrating mental health into the primary care system instead of stigmatizing or segregating it. I'll ask Seth, just who's the administrator of this town hall, if you can put up a link, if you can find it, to the Veterans Crisis Line that Ike mentioned. And I'll just tell everybody who's joining us, if you are struggling or worried about somebody else and struggling with the kind of mental health challenges that Ike's describing, you should call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for free, 844-493-8255. Or if you're a vet, it looks like it's 1-800-273-8255. That's 1-800-273-8255 and press 1. Thanks for that. I really appreciate that help. Those numbers are staffed both by mental health specialists and by peer specialists, folks who have been there and gone through similar experiences. And I've been talking to folks throughout this pandemic who are, even though I'm not a mental health professional, I play one on Zoom, who are in need of care. And I don't want anybody to struggle or suffer or die on account of problems that we can fix. I know you don't either. So we're getting a number of questions in here about the priorities that you and I share. We're talking a little bit about healthcare, and we've had conversations on this town hall in the past with Wendell Potter, who leads the movement for universal single payer care. Is that a proposal you support?
Yeah, I absolutely, excuse me, absolutely support a single payer Medicare for all healthcare system because, of course, one, it's the morally right thing to do, and two, it's the most fiscally responsible thing to do because, there's close to 100 trillion in profiteering built into our, healthcare system. And we really need to talk about reallocating that towards building rural hospitals, educating nurses and doctors and EMTs, and providing our citizens with access to the highest quality healthcare in the world because we're the richest nation in the world. So why should our citizens not have access to the highest quality healthcare in the world? And the disparities in access are the real problems in our system. And if we want a system that would provide our corporations, for instance, or our businesses with quality, mentally stable, healthy workforce, then the smartest thing to do in the richest nation on earth is, to provide every citizen with, high quality healthcare, including, access to dental and vision and
Yep.
And mental health care. Of course, like you said, should be part of the primary system.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And it's surprising in a way that businesses aren't leading the charge because they're the ones that are picking up the tab, and we're spending twice as much as our competitors in other industrialized nations for health outcomes that aren't actually twice as good. One of the things in our way is not just the opposition of the insurance industry and the drug companies and candidates like both Hickenlooper and Gardner who are parroting their talking points. It's also some misinformation, I think, and maybe you could address this with a rural perspective because I know that's a big part of your district and obviously a big part of the state I hope to represent. Some folks say, well, gosh, if you forced rural hospitals and providers to subsist on existing Medicare reimbursement rates, they'd go broke. When we're talking about, we just had this conversation actually at a town hall last night with some folks up in Fort Collins. When we're talking about Medicare for all, we're not just saying, let's take the system as it exists today and put everybody in it. Because for one thing, the reimbursement rates, especially for rural communities, are too low. For another thing, as you just suggested, Ike, the benefits are not substantial enough. We need to add dental, vision, hearing, long-term care, good mental health care. So what I think you and I are suggesting is if you took some of the savings that would come from a single payer plan, instead of subsidizing all the administrative waste and insurance and drug company profits and overhead, why don't we put that into healthcare, stuff that actually makes people better, including reimbursement rates for these providers. Have you had those conversations with folks in the fourth CD?
Yeah, absolutely. And when I talk to actual healthcare providers, when I talk to nurses and doctors in the district, they're also, conveying the message that when and if, the COVID pandemic does, and it is already impacting our rural hospitals, that they simply don't have the capacity to, deal with that situation. And so, yeah, we're not talking about taking a whole bunch of people and shoving them into the system that currently exists and the funding that is currently there. We're talking about taking funding that right now is essentially being allocated to profits and administrative waste and reallocating that towards a system that is patient care centric instead of profit centric. And there are a lot of systems like this, that have kind of been intruded on by profiteering. Our educational institutions should be focused on education instead of profits. And in this case, our healthcare system should be focused on patient care instead of profits.
We're getting a number of questions on our system here about your opponent, Ken Buck. So let's just go there. Representative Buck has been in the news lately. Some people say there's no such thing as bad publicity. He might be disproving that right now. can you fill us in on what Congressman Buck is going through?
Yeah, just a second.
Sorry.
Sorry about that.
No, it happens.
I have a paralyzed vocal cord, so occasionally my voice will go out on me. It's from a combat injury. But yeah, what's going on with Ken Buck is I think it's kind of part and partial to who Ken Buck is. And, I think it's very exemplary of his character. And essentially what's happened is the chair of the SD10, the Republican, chair
So
of the State Senate District 10, Eli Bremer, he refused, and I think rightfully so, to, sign off on a fraudulent assembly ballot count. Then basically the committee, the state committee, Republican committee was instructing, and Ken Buck specifically was instructing him that he needed to sign off that a candidate had received 30% of the vote when the candidate had not received 30% of the vote. So essentially he was ordering him to commit fraud.
And we should probably explain that Congressman Buck is not only a member of the U.S. House, he's also chair of the Colorado Republican Party. So in his capacity, and I think this is on audio, we put up a link when we were preparing for the town hall. The Denver Post and other outlets have reported on it. The number that the losing candidate received was short of the 30% he needed to qualify for the ballot. And so they were trying to round up.
Right. Yeah. Kind of actually, just give him an extra. I think it was 26%, and he had to get the 30% to make threshold and had not. And so the committee was ordering Bremer to sign off that he had received 30%. And Bremer's response was that he needed to seek legal counsel to make sure he wasn't committing a crime to do so.
That seems like a reasonable response. So what's Congressman Buck's explanation? Like, why would you tell somebody to report something that's not true?
Yeah, I think essentially they wanted both of the candidates on the ballot, but Buck basically said that it was the choice of the committee and that he was giving Bremer the committee's instructions, not telling him to, fraud, whatever. It wasn't instructing him to fraudulently produce a document,
right?
But he was instructing him to, put both candidates on the ballot. And then according to, the bylaws, the only way to get on the ballot is to have 30%. So the only way Bremer could put him on the ballot was to sign off that he had received 30%. And so it was a catch-22.
I saw I think there was some explanation that suggested they were trying to account for the pandemic, and that may have justified an adjustment of the numbers. I'm not sure really how that plays out. It occurs to me that we could host a debate. You and I were talking about this the other day. I can't get John Hickenlooper to debate me, but maybe I could get you to debate Ken Buck. Now, this is not the most neutral platform to host a debate like that because I support you. But at least we could hear both sides of this very interesting development in your race. And I know it's not the only place where you differ with Representative Buck. Could you just run through a couple areas to tell us, in case anybody's on the fence, why you'd be better to represent the 4th CD than the fellow who's there now?
Yeah, number one, I believe in the rule of law. And I think if state bylaws say something, that the chair of the party responsible for the honest conduct of that party's actions should adhere to those bylaws and not instruct their subordinates to commit fraud. So that's number one. I believe in the rule of law, and Ken Buck consistently skirts the rule of law in order to enfranchise the folks that are around him. I think that I would be, I don't think, I know that I would be a better representative than Ken Buck because I'm honest and I have ownership. I don't think I have all the answers, but I know that together we do have all the answers and that all the technology exists to rapidly transition our energy production, provide CD4 with thousands of sustainable, good paying jobs, high quality healthcare. We can invest in our educational institutions and we can start treating each other with dignity and respect again, like Americans instead of like Republicans, independents, or Democrats, or some divided tribal society. We need to come together right now in this time of national crisis and address the real threats that face our nation, like pandemics, like the climate crisis, like a lack of access to health care, like income inequality, and like a lack of cohesive criminal justice.
If people want to help put that argument, which you made so eloquently just now, in front of more voters, this is a softball, what can they do to help you out?
Of course, you can get on IkeForCO.com and you can make a financial contribution, because those financial contributions always help us get inside the mailboxes, get inside the email, the text, and on the radio waves and on the TV screens of those persuadable independent voters that we need to reach and that are critical to our ability to win CD4 and do all those things that we're talking about, like address the environmental crisis and get healthcare for all. So you could go on my website, IkeForCO.com, and you can make a contribution. You can share our social media and you can volunteer for the campaign. Right now, we're trying to ramp up our phone, text, and email campaigns and fill our coffers so that we can get, like I said, into the mailboxes of every single independent voter in the district, win the district, and then make formative change.
Right on. I'm with you on that. And for those just joining us, this is my talk show hat on. We're joined by Ike McCorkle, Democratic candidate for Colorado's 4th Congressional District, hoping to replace Ken Buck in the United States House of Representatives. We're going to be joined in about 10 minutes by a representative from United Food and Commercial Workers Local 7, the agency that represents, the union that represents the workers at JBS meatpacking plant, 7 of whom have now died during this pandemic. And I want to touch on that issue before we bring on UFCW as well. But you talked a little bit about the jobs and the environment. And obviously, you and I are supporting a plan to combat the climate crisis and put people back to work. A Green New Deal takes inspiration from the original New Deal, when we saw such an enormous economic downturn that we needed leaders who were willing to be bold. I think the phrase that comes to mind from FDR in those days was the value of bold, persistent experimentation. And I wondered, in the conversations you've had, Ike, in the 4th CD, especially on the Eastern Plains, there's so much tremendous wind potential, but also obviously throughout your district and throughout our state, a lot of oil and gas production and the revenue and jobs that come with it. What kind of conversations are you having? I'm happy to share some thoughts too about how we make this transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy and what the economic benefits and costs will be.
Yeah, and of course there are economic benefits and costs, and folks are rightfully concerned, and they should be, because it's their sustenance. It's how they put food on the table. It's their quality of life, how they support their families. And so everybody in the energy industry is rightfully concerned. And so I think that's where we really need to start the conversation. And I think that it needs to be largely centered around, protections for workers' rights and protection of sustainable incomes, because right now we have oil and gas kind of tanking, and historically oil and gas is an unstable market. So what do we need to do to provide sustainable, income and benefits to the folks in our district? And the way that we do that, I think, is by passing a federal mandate that all new investments and installations be made in the renewable sector. Then you have current energy producing companies, even carbon producing energy producing companies, more rapidly transitioning. And then you utilize the subsidies and tax incentives for companies that are rapidly transitioning. And all new investments and installations are being made in the renewable sector. And you provide a job guarantee for those energy workers in the industry now. So what we're really talking about doing is expanding opportunity, employment, and earnings in the existing energy infrastructure and rapidly transitioning the existing infrastructure into renewable production companies. That way, we don't have anyone, left out on the side of the street with no income because, oil and gas are tanking. When you really talk about production and continued production, the only sustainable continued production in our area now is hydraulic fracturing. And, that's destroying our environment, our land, our air, and our water. And if you talk about individual landowners and how they would benefit from, say, having a federally subsidized wind turbine installed on their property versus having the mineral rights exploited for their property and having a frac well installed on their property. Well, frac well is going to produce, maybe 1 to 3 years and 10 years at max. And then you're left with poisoned air, land, and water and no earnings. Whereas if you have a federally subsidized wind turbine installed on your property, that turbine's going to produce with a little bit of maintenance into perpetuity. And your grandchildren are going to be getting the benefits from that, just like we still get power from the Hoover Dam. And so those are the type of systems we need to talk about, and the type of systems that are actually going to provide people in our district with an improvement in their quality of life, improvement in their wages and earnings, and an expansion in employment opportunity in the existing industry.
Well, I agree with what you're saying, and I will tell you, I assume you're not getting a lot of money from the fossil fuel industry in your campaign. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair to say. No, we're not taking any corporate PAC or fossil fuel money. Yeah.
Yeah, we're not either. But I just wanted to spell out the differences here to sum up. Where you and I are, I think, in the same place. We're saying no to fossil fuel industry money. We're saying yes to this bold plan to shift from fossil fuels to clean energy. We're saying yes to a healthcare system that doesn't make your coverage depend on your job. So you and I are saying yes and yes and yes. Well, Corey Gardner, Ken Buck, and I'm sad to say even John Hickenlooper are saying no and no and no.
Yeah.
And to me, at least, that makes these choices pretty clear. One other issue that's come up a lot in our conversations around rural Colorado particularly is access to high-speed broadband internet, which is really the equivalent of what the interstate highway system was starting in the 1950s, or the railroad was in the 1800s. That it is the lifeline of an economy. So how's access where you are?
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of sections of CD4, you don't have access. So
yeah,
that's kind of the state of things. And, there have been investments made and there have been promises made, but really not much done with respect to expanding access in the rural sections of Eastern Colorado. And so my plan is something a little bit different. It's bold. That's and I think those are, we need bold answers right now because we have big problems. But with respect to communication systems in the United States right now, this is something that isn't just an issue of, folks in rural districts being able to access broadband. I think that it's actually compromising and threatening our national security. And we have other advanced countries rapidly developing, protected 5G communication networks that are not dependent on vulnerable satellite systems. And so that significantly impacts our national security when our military systems right now are dependent on satellite networks. I think that we need a vast federal investment and reinvestment in America and in the systems that support our people. One of those systems, I think, is a ground-based, protected, advanced 5G network that can serve DoD and civilian communications alike, and provide, our rural communities with connectivity that they need to get their education, to do their work in the emerging economy, which is much more, electronically based.
It strikes me when Kerry Kennedy, you may know, was state treasurer, and when I was Speaker of the House, we spent a lot of time in your district and out on the Eastern Plains, down in the San Luis Valley, up in the Western Slope, and up in Northern Colorado, really throughout the state, visiting schools where the roofs were caving in or the floorboards were literally too rotten to hold up a desk. And it strikes me, as I know it does to you, that the quality of your education should not depend on your zip code or your parents' bank account, your access to healthcare, to a decent job, to the information superhighway. None of those things seems to me ought to be off limits just because of where you find yourself in life. And we're all going to sink or swim here at some point together, but it's pretty clear, just to touch on one more issue that you mentioned earlier, that this crisis and economic opportunity generally in America are not born equally, that there's a huge gap between rich and poor, inequality that has been exacerbated and exposed by this pandemic. You look at African-American families, for example, in America holding 1/10 of wealth on average of white families. You look at folks stuck in poverty and finding it harder to climb out than in other industrialized nations. So can you just, in the, 2 minutes that we have left before we're joined by a conversation about UFCW with Melissa McCallister, can you tell us a little bit about your thoughts on economic inequality? Does UBI, Universal Basic Income, fit into that conversation? How do we help make real the American dream?
Yeah, and thank you for that question. And I think that, this pandemic has brought everything to the surface. It's made it more relevant than ever before, even though it was just below the surface before, when the economy was humming along and people were getting their paychecks that they were living off of from paycheck to paycheck. But, I think the way that we get back to making America great again, to steal a slogan, is by, instituting large programs that reinvest in America and get America back to work post-pandemic. And I think those are in our history. We can look and see that the Civilian Conservation Corps in 1929 planted 29 million trees. 1939, they planted 29 million trees. And, paved 280,000 miles of roads and built thousands of schools and hospitals and bridges. And we have big systemic problems and we have big structural needs. And the way that I think we address those and the needs of the American people are with a universal basic income, with guaranteeing people a roof over their head. I think that we need to get back to FDR's Second Bill of Rights and ensure that people have protections during times of sickness and injury, illness, and health alike. And those are the type of systems that, when you put revenue in the hands of people like myself that live paycheck to paycheck, it goes directly back into the system. And it goes into the system in the place that we need it right now, which is the emerging economy. Because the economy of yesterday, whether we wanted to or not, is really not going to come back in a roaring fashion, because we have a lot of, this pandemic has placed a lot of restrictions upon what we can and can't do. So I think we need to look at ensuring that during this time of national crisis, that government does what its basic task is, and that is to, during the time of crisis, national crisis, provide for, protect the people that make up the nation, That's the very basic tenet of government, to provide, protect for the people. And so I think that a universal basic income is part of that, because right now we have, close to 35% unemployment, and we have families that just simply can't even put food on the table. So I think a universal basic income is part of that. Of course, we've already talked about a Green New Deal, Medicare for all healthcare system, and I think a housing guarantee and a job guarantee should be part of it as well.
I'm with you on this challenge, because I look at 1937. We're not there yet, but when FDR described 1/3 of a nation ill-housed, ill-clad, ill-nourished, he said, the test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much, it's whether we provide enough for those who have too little. Yeah. We don't have FDR in the White House right now, not by a long shot. Whatever the opposite of FDR is, occupies that seat. But it strikes me that you and I are on the same page here. This is not a time for timidity. It's a time for bold, courageous leadership, and I'm glad you're providing it. And I want to encourage you to continue this conversation here now with Melissa McCollister, who is joining us, it looks like from a beachfront location. At least maybe that's just your wall. She's the political liaison for United Food and Commercial Workers Local 7. And some of your workers obviously live in soon-to-be Congressman McCorkle's district and work at the JBS plant in Greeley. And I want to say, Melissa, especially since I gave you almost no notice to join us today, I want to say thank you for coming back. You and I shared a conversation a couple weeks ago with brisket trimmer from JBS's plant there in Greeley, and a meat cutter from a Safeway near here in Lakewood. And since then, we've seen another death, I'm sad to say, at this plant, the 7th person to die now. And I also just saw some news, just to set the stage here, yesterday, I think, that 2 workers, I'm told at least, claimed they were fired because they had to stay home. They were sick and ordered to quarantine, which cost them their job. Thank you for joining us. And I want to make sure. Tell us, bring us up to speed on what's going on at JBS and what Ike and I and others can do to help. Please.
So you're right. There has been one more death since the last time we'd spoken. There are now 280 positive cases. They're still only testing people who have symptoms. So if they're asymptomatic, they're not being tested. There were the 2 members that you were referring to were terminated. So what had happened is they called in on a Friday, and from what I understand, there's been several people that have called in sick and no one is there to answer the calls. So when they returned to work on Monday, they came in, they took their temperature when they came in the door, and they were over the allowed temperature. So they took their badges, and then the next they'd heard they'd been terminated. So since then, our union has obviously been involved, and our reps have filed grievances and taken the appropriate steps. And from what I heard from our president this morning, they have been reinstated. But I'm sure it's just because of the pressure that they have been under lately. There's not much changed, honestly, from the last time we'd spoken. They are providing masks, but it's very minimal. I mean, it's just the bare basics. They still, as Crystal was talking last time about the barriers between the people, that's still about the best they've done. So it's just continuing to get worse, and still haven't changed their tune.
You said, Melissa, that one of the reasons you suspect that the workers were reinstated, and I want to say thanks to you and to UFCW for representing them and fighting for them, as we all should, might be the pressure. So if we want to amp up the pressure to get more folks tested and treated and not fired or die on account of this crisis, which is, I think, an interest we all share, are the things that we can do as Coloradans to help, or as candidates?
Well, I mean, it's hopefully the exposure is getting to them a little, I think, because this is national now. It's not, Pence is speaking about it. It's not just a little local meatpacking plant anymore. Not that it was little, but It's certainly gained exposure, which is putting pressure. I think that, I don't know that that's something that everyday people can do really, is to go on the media and speak about these issues. But like we had talked before, Governor Polis has some authority to make some changes there. Instead of these being recommendations, they should be mandated. PPE testing. The testing is the big thing. I can't say enough. Testing. Everyone should be tested, and it shouldn't be out of their own pockets, and it shouldn't be inconvenient. It should be something the company provides daily if need be.
So one of our viewers is asking whether we can help get these folks rehired, but you just said they have been. So we want to make sure that nobody else gets fired because they have to stay home to stay well. One of our earlier town halls, I suggested the best you could say about the country's approach, especially out of this administration to this crisis, is that it's largely improvisational. I think that's too kind. It's not just that they're making this up as they go along, but the president's obviously done his best to delegitimize science and facts. I mentioned earlier other quaint traditions like the rule of law, dignity, and respect among the other victims of this president. So what can we do? I'll ask this of both of you, I guess, to make sure that everybody gets tested. How do we get to a place where it's not just that you're showing signs, which is a little late in the game to get tested, but we need to get to a place of universal testing. Did you want to weigh in on that too, Ike?
Yeah, for sure, I did. I think that it's a tragedy. One, corporations shouldn't be opening back up before they have the capacity to protect their workers. And then second, what you asked about, how do we get to where we have the capacity to test people? And I think that unfortunately that really would have started with a competent, governmental response. It would have started with a government and leadership that understood how to utilize the Defense Production Act, how to organize different factories that make different materials, and really do the logistical coordination that needs to be done between those factories to transition production, and then to utilize, the United States military to rapidly transport those critical life-saving, materials, including ventilators and masks and everything else, to the points where they're needed. And, Cuomo spoke about this, but if we had somebody in leadership who paid attention to intelligence briefings, who, maybe actually read the intelligence briefings, then, we would have a government that was, actually having a sight picture on what they needed to do in order to do what we were talking about earlier, the basic functions of government, which is to serve, protect, and provide for its people, during a time of national crisis. And so the massive lack of material, personal protective equipment, that is a just monumental government failure. And so my answer is, unfortunately right now we have a whole bunch of incompetence in our government. And we have, a congressional representative in my district, Ken Buck, who, actively denies the deadliness of this pandemic and questions, our public health officials, the Tri-County Health, and Dr. Fauci, all of them. And so we need to adhere to the rule of science, the rule of law, and we need representatives in office who understand how to manipulate the tools of government to serve and protect the people during a time of national crisis.
It strikes me what you're proposing, and I agree with everything you just said, is not too much to ask for. It's really sobering that we're forced now to defend what we used to take for granted, that we'd have a president who reads. I know this is not like the biggest aspiration in the world, but it'd be to proof it over the one we've got. There are some things that some of our guests, not just Crystal Rodriguez, who joined us from JBS last week, but also Ruben Tim Martinez, as I mentioned, a meat cutter at Safeway, asked customers to wear masks if they're not mandated, and they're not everywhere yet. the least we could do is not put the people who are serving us and helping us stay fed, put them in harm's way. I know that, Melissa, there's reports out following this conversation on Twitter about Costco's decision to require masks. So, and I don't know if you can speak to this off the cuff here, but some stores, it seems like, are taking their own initiative in the absence of a mandate to demand their customers and require their staffs to wear masks, and others are not. Does UFCW have a position on that, or are you talking to the stores whose employees you represent about mask requirements for customers as well?
Well, yes, we've asked the companies to make it mandatory. We would like to see that. They have not taken that initiative, however. I know in Denver, it is mandated now. I was in a store, a Safeway, just the other day, and I was getting yelled at by a customer because she was forced to wear a mask. I don't know if she thought I worked there. I'm not quite sure. I had a name tag on, but and there were 2 incidences just in that one store, and it's mind-boggling why people just don't do it. It's, who cares if you're not worried about yourself, that's one thing, but everybody else around you, these people who are here 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, they need to be protected.
I agree with what you're saying here. This is not a panel, I think, that's going to find a lot of disagreement. And to Ike's point, the fact that we haven't assured our healthcare workers and other frontline heroes the personal protective equipment that they're asking, the support that they need, not just to protect themselves, to protect all of us, to my mind, is barbaric. I mean, it's nice that we're howling every night. I'm doing that too, to show my support. But they're howling for help. And the fact that we're not providing it at this late stage in this pandemic is indefensible, in my view, at least. We got about a minute left. Melissa, anything else that you think we should be doing? Should we be calling the governor, calling JBS? Who should we be directing our police to at this point?
Yeah, both. I think on our UFCW Local 7R is our Facebook page. I believe their contact information is on there for JBS. And then, yeah, the governor, I think just the louder we can be about this and the more exposure we can give our membership is the best we can do right now.
Thank you. So UFCW Local 7R, is that what you said?
Mm-hmm. Yep, there's an R at the end of it.
Got it. We'll try to provide a link before we post this. And by the way, for those folks, just as we're logging off here, we're going to post all of these town hall meetings at andrewromanoff.com/live, andrewromanoff.com/live, so you can see this conversation if you missed some of it or see previous conversations. So it's a really, I will tell you, just heart-wrenching conversation. I should ask Melissa, in case you know how Crystal's dad is doing. We had that talk with her because he also worked at the JBS plant, Crystal Rodriguez's father, and then contracted COVID, but I think is headed out of the woods if he's not there yet. Do you have any? He's
getting better, but he's still not out of the woods completely yet.
That's what I understand too. Ike McCorkle, I want to give you the last word. What else do you want folks to know before they go to vote? I guess you got a few more months, right? You'll have the luxury of an uncontested primary June 30th, so you're probably not as worried about that as I am. But
yeah, we got a couple months here to get our coffers filled, so get on ikeforco.com, make a contribution. Melissa, it's nice to meet you. Thank you so much for what you do for all the workers at the facilities. And thank you, Andrew, for having me on here. Everybody, if you can get behind progressive candidates like Andrew Romanoff, we stand a really good chance of getting the policy passed that we need passed to address the threats of this century. So make a donation to Andrew's campaign, make a contribution to my campaign, and together we're going to get into office. We're going to pass a Green New Deal, and we're going to start living up to the America that we've always really promised ourselves to be, but we haven't ever really been at all. A land of liberty and justice and equity under the law for all, not just those who are enfranchised. Thank you all so much for your time, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate it and how honored I am and how much gratitude I have and how much respect I have for each and every one of you on this panel. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ike. Ike McCorkle. Again, McCorkle and McCollister. You guys are easy to remember. Ike McCorkle, Democratic candidate for Colorado's 4th Congressional District. Melissa McCollister, political liaison for UFCW Local 7. Thank you both for what you're doing. And thank you all for joining us. I hope you'll come back. Join us again Tuesdays at 5 Mountain Time, Fridays at noon. Stay tuned for future episodes of this improvised virtual campaign trail. You can learn more at andrewromanoff.com. Really appreciate your time. Thank you both for sharing your afternoon with me. And thank you all for joining us today.
Thanks. Bye.